Buying a new camera is always an amazing thing. But right after the unboxing, the struggle begins, because you have to dial in your settings. And modern cameras are like computers. They have menus, they are crowded like hell. And they are not very user-friendly. But there are a few things that I change with every new camera that I get to get started with it. Hey, my name is Chris, I'm a German photographer, and in this video I show you the things that I change with every new camera. And don't be worried, I won't bore you with an unboxing, because I've already done it for you. So the first thing I always change is the auto mode. Because every new camera comes in full automatic mode. Don't be afraid, you do not have to shoot in manual mode, but you want at least a little bit of control. So the mode that I always choose at first is aperture priority. Aperture priority gives you the ability to control your aperture. What that means is that you set the aperture and the camera chooses the shutter speed and the ISO mode for you. The good thing is, the benefit of this one is that you can control your depth of field. And I think that is the thing that most people want to control, because it controls your blurry background. If you have the camera in full auto, the camera gets you a very well lit picture, but how should the camera know how much depth of field you want? The camera doesn't know. If you're shooting landscapes and you want a sharp picture, or that you're shooting portraits and you want a blurred background, for example. So, first thing, aperture priority, because you can control your background. Let me show it with this example. In this example, you see this beautiful Leica SL camera. I shot it once, wide open with a blurred background, and then I closed the aperture, so you see that you have a lot of sharpness in the image and your background is not that blurred. And then I shot it in full auto. You have a little bit of a blurred background, you have a well-lit image as well, but it is not what you wanted. It's not a completely blurred background and it's not a completely sharp image. So that's the benefit of aperture priority. So before we jump to the next setting that I always change, let me explain you the other auto modes every camera has. One is shutter priority. If you choose shutter priority, you dial in the shutter speed that your camera should use. The camera chooses the aperture and the ISO. But before I choose shutter priority, I would choose auto ISO and go fully manual with the rest. Because if I want to choose my speed, well, most of the time I want to control my depth of field as well. So I want to control the aperture. By the way, only going with auto ISO and full manual is a great way as well, because you have more control than with aperture priority and shutter priority. But at the beginning, I think aperture priority is the best for most of you. And then there's P mode. P mode is the mode that I never use. It's basically full auto mode, you only choose the ISO. So the only thing you can control is how grainy the image is. So with that said, let's go to the next one. And the next setting that I change right away is the autofocus. I always go from single AF to continuous AF. What that means is, single autofocus means you're focusing to any point and there will always be your focus. But the problem is, if you're shooting people, if you're shooting animals, cars, whatever, they are moving. And even though when you're shooting something static, you're moving as well. And every time something moves and you're using single autofocus mode, well, your autofocus will be off. So I always go from single autofocus to continuous autofocus. Continuous autofocus measures the distance to the object all the time. So the next setting I always change is JPEG to RAW. That is something that if you're just beginning and you want to try out your camera and you do not want to edit your photos, then you might leave the camera on JPEG, because basically what JPEG is an already color graded image in the camera, while RAW gives you more flexibility. The RAW file out of camera will look flat, not saturated, no contrast, you have to edit it. But what it gives you is much more flexibility at the editing. For example, you can change white balance, you can change your shadows, you can light them up, you can pull down your highlights. You can basically change the whole image. You can also do a few tweaks at the JPEGs as well, but JPEG data crash much faster if you're editing them. So to round it up, if you're not editing your photos, you may want to leave, or you surely want to leave your camera on JPEGs. But if you want to edit your photos, what I highly recommend, of course, digital images have to be edited, then you should choose RAW. Now to visualize all of that, let me quickly show you a RAW image, like it comes out of camera, and how it looks if it's graded. So what you see here is an unedited RAW file. And now if I'm dragging this slider, you can see the edit file. So here, side by side, unedited on the left, edited on the right. You see the difference. And you also can go to black and white. You can do that with JPEGs as well, of course, but same here with the settings. You can't change them as good as you can with this RAW file. And with that, on to the next setting. Now on the photo side, we basically changed everything I do at the beginning. But most of the cameras these days, besides the Leica M for example, do have great video features as well. And for all of those that shoot video, here are a few things that I change for video. Now the first thing I always do is going from standard MP4 mode to log. The Leica, for example, has L-Log, Sony's have S-Log, Canons have C-Log, I don't know what Nikon has or Fujifilm, but basically every camera these days give you log. Log is something like RAW on the photo side. There are RAW in video as well, but normally you do not shoot RAW for YouTube videos or something like that, because RAW files in video, they are very, very big. I only shoot them when I know that I have very, very hard lighting conditions and I have to tweak a lot of things at the end. But basically L-Log or log, doesn't matter if it's L-Log, S-Log, C-Log or so on, log always has more abilities to be graded. Log comes out of the camera as a flat color profile as well, so you do have to grade it. But there's one thing with log that's different to photo, and that's when you're shooting it. When you shoot log, or if you shoot video in log, you have to overexpose your image. So I do not have a problem to overexpose 1 or 2 stops for S-Log or L-Log. Of course, the benefit is those log files, they are very good on recovering highlights, but they are not that good on recovering shadows. On the photo side, it's completely different. You can recover shadows in photos these days very, very easy. But highlights are pretty fast burned out. With log, if you want to try to raise those shadows, you see grain very, very fast. So keep in mind, if you shoot log, always overexpose by 1 or 2 stops. So now that we talked about the settings in photo mode and video mode, let's talk about a few settings that are different if I shoot photo than if I shoot video. So like I said, if I shoot photo, I always shoot on aperture or auto ISO. The only time when I shoot completely manual, white balance manual, aperture manual, shutter speed manual, and the ISO manual is if I'm shooting under complete controlled lighting conditions in the studio. If I want every picture looking the same. In video, I never shoot in aperture priority. I always shoot fully manual, because I always want my shutter speed on 24 frames per second and I want to control my aperture as well. Outside, I'm leaving the white balance on auto as well these days, because cameras are pretty good with that these days. In the early days of my videography, I always set my white balance to 5500. Now you can change many different things, but with those settings, you can go out shooting and get great results. So tell me, what are the settings that are you changing if you get a new camera. Was there anything I missed? Is anything that you absolutely do have to change? And if you want to know about my favorite camera, watch this video about the Leica Q3.